The stars blurred into streaks of light as the horizon's edge dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Captain Ji-won Kim stood on the bridge, her hands clasped behind her back, watching through the viewport as the massive structure came into view. Sanctuary Prime was unlike anything humanity had ever built. The station stretched for hundreds of kilometers, a gleaming monument to alien engineering that orbited a neutron star like a jewel around a deadly heart. "We're being hailed," said the communications officer. "They're sending docking coordinates." Kwon nodded. "Take us in. Nice and steady. Let's make a good first impression." Behind her, Dr. Haeon Park adjusted his datapad nervously. He had studied every piece of information humanity had gathered about the Galactic Council over the past 3 years since first detecting their signals. 47 different species, living in peace for over 10,000 years? It seemed impossible. Yet here they were, about to meet them face to face. "Captain, I'm detecting unusual scanner activity," said the science officer. "They're running deep scans on our ship and crew. Medical-grade scanners." "Let them look," Gi-won said calmly. "We have nothing to hide." What she didn't know was that in the Council's medical bay, alarms were beginning to sound. A Vrelnian doctor stared at the readouts with all 3 of his eyes wide in shock. The readings from the human ship made no sense. These creatures could survive gravity that would crush most species into paste. Their cellular structure could withstand radiation levels that would be lethal to 90% of Council members. They had redundant organs, aggressive immune responses, and bone density that seemed designed for a world far harsher than the peaceful garden planets most civilizations called home. "Get Counselor Vextharn," the doctor said to his assistant. "He needs to see this." The docking procedures took 2 hours. When the airlocks finally connected, Ambassador Daeho Choi straightened his uniform and prepared to step into history. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes, chosen for his diplomatic experience and his ability to remain calm under pressure. Behind him stood Guan and Haeon, along with 6 other crew members who would serve as their security and support staff. The airlock opened, and they stepped into a corridor filled with beings from a dozen different worlds. Some walked on 2 legs, others on 4 or 6. Some had scales, others had fur or skin that seemed to shimmer with internal light. The air smelled strange, filled with scents that human noses had never encountered before. A tall, reptilian creature approached them. Its scales were deep purple, and its eyes were golden with vertical slits. "I am Counselor Vexarn," it said, its voice translated by the universal communicator built into the station. "Welcome to Sanctuary Prime. We have much to discuss." The meeting chamber was enormous, designed to accommodate species of vastly different sizes and environmental needs. The human delegation sat at a small table while Vexthorn and 6 other council representatives faced them from an elevated platform. It reminded Daeho uncomfortably of a courtroom. "We have reviewed your application for council membership," Vexthorn began. "We have also reviewed the data about your home world. I must be honest with you, Ambassador. We are deeply concerned." Daeho frowned. "Concerned? About what?" "About Earth," said another counselor, a floating creature that looked like a jellyfish made of light. "Your world is what we classify as a Category 9 death world. The fact that sentient life evolved there at all is remarkable. The fact that you survived long enough to develop technology is nothing short of miraculous." Hyun leaned forward. "I don't understand." "Earth is our home. Yes, it has challenges. But challenges." Vexarn interrupted. "Your planet experiences tectonic shifts that regularly destroy entire regions. Your weather patterns include storms that could devastate our cities. Your oceans contain creatures that could tear apart our strongest warriors. Your microscopic life is so aggressive that it would kill most of us within hours of exposure. And yet you call this normal." "We've adapted to our environment," Juan said quietly. "Just as I'm sure your species adapted to yours." "That is precisely our concern," the jellyfish counselor replied. "Your species has adapted to survive conditions that would annihilate most civilized races. Your physical capabilities are frankly terrifying. Your ability to tolerate pain, to push your bodies beyond rational limits, To fight and kill with efficiency, these are not the traits of a peaceful people. Deho felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. We have been at peace on Earth for over a century. We have eliminated war, poverty, and disease. We come to you with open hands and open hearts, seeking friendship and knowledge. Vextharn's expression was difficult to read, but Jawan thought she detected something like pity. We do not doubt your current intentions, Ambassador, but we have learned through 10,000 years of peace that civilizations from harsh worlds often bring their violence with them into the stars. We cannot risk the stability of the Council. So you're denying our membership? Deho said flatly. We are granting you observer status, Vextharn corrected. You may maintain an embassy here. You may learn from us and trade with us on a limited basis. But you will have no vote, no voice in Council decisions, and no claim to Council protection or resources. Perhaps in a few centuries, when you have proven yourselves civilized, we can revisit this decision. The meeting ended shortly after. The human delegation returned to their ship in silence. Once the airlock sealed behind them, Deho slammed his fist against the wall. Civilized. They call us uncivilized? They're afraid of us, Hyun said softly. Did you see how they looked at the medical data? They think we're monsters. Giwon moved to the bridge and pulled up the long-range scanners. Maybe we should be more concerned about what's out there than what they think of us. What do you mean? Deho asked. G1 pointed to the display. I've been monitoring Council military movements since we arrived. They're pulling ships from the outer territories and consolidating them here around the core worlds. That's a defensive posture. Defensive against what? I don't know. But I asked one of the station's junior officers about it. He got nervous and changed the subject. Guan zoomed in on a region of space beyond Council territory. Something's out there. Something that has them worried. Over the next 4 months, the human embassy on Sanctuary Prime became operational. Deho met with minor Council officials, negotiated trade agreements for basic goods, and tried to build relationships. But the humans were kept at arm's length, treated with polite coldness by most species and outright hostility by some. Hyun spent his time in the Council's public archives, studying alien cultures and biology. He made friends with a few junior researchers who were curious about humans, but even they seemed nervous around him. As if he might suddenly become violent, G1 remained aboard the Horizon's Edge, monitoring communications and scanning the edges of Council space. Her crew grew restless, feeling unwelcome and useless. Then, on a quiet morning by station time, everything changed. Alarms began to sound throughout Sanctuary Prime. Emergency broadcasts flooded every channel. Jiwon watched her displays light up with distress signals from the outer colonies. Captain, her communications officer said, his voice shaking, I'm receiving reports of attacks. Multiple systems. Ships destroyed, planets burning. Who? Jiwon demanded. They're calling them the Dominion. They came from beyond the rim. The Council's outer defense fleet is gone. Just gone. 3 colonies have fallen in the last 6 hours. Giwon activated her comlink to the embassy. Deho, are you seeing this? I'm seeing it, the ambassador replied grimly. I'm heading to an emergency council session now. They're not letting me in, but I'm going anyway. Guan looked at her crew. Young men and women who had trained their entire lives to explore the stars and meet new friends among the cosmos. Now they sat on their ship, watching the galaxy burn, while the people who had rejected them scrambled to respond to a threat they clearly hadn't anticipated. All crew to battle stations, Guan said quietly. Charge the weapons and warm up the engines. I have a feeling we're going to need them. In the council chambers, Vexathorn stared at the casualty reports with mounting horror. 60,000 ships. Gone. Just gone. The Dominion fleet had swept through the outer territories like a blade through silk. And now they were coming for the core worlds, where billions of civilians lived in cities that had never known war. The council had no idea what to do. They had forgotten how to fight. The refugee ships arrived at Sanctuary Prime in a steady stream. They came from the outer colonies. packed with survivors who had witnessed horrors that the Council's peaceful civilization couldn't comprehend. Families torn apart, cities reduced to ash, entire planets stripped of resources and left to die. The Dominion showed no mercy and took no prisoners, except as slaves. Commander Sunho watched the refugees from the observation deck of his ship, the Defiant Dawn. He was a career military officer, a man who had spent 20 years preparing for threats that everyone said would never come. Now those threats were here, and he felt a burning need to act. "Sir, we've received new orders from Earth Command," his executive officer said. "We're to remain on station and await further instructions." Sunho's jaw tightened. "How many ships do we have in the sector now?" 12 frigates. 6 day. Troyers and the horizon's edge. Admiral Chen is sending reinforcements. They won't arrive for another 3 weeks. 3 weeks? Sunho repeated bitterly. How many more worlds will fall in 3 weeks? In the station's medical bay, Mina Yoon worked alongside alien doctors to treat the wounded refugees. She was young for a combat medic, only 26, but she had top marks from the academy and hands that stayed steady no matter how bad things got. What shocked her wasn't the injury she had trained for trauma medicine, but how fragile these aliens seemed. A Vrelnian with a broken arm needed immediate surgery and weeks of recovery. A human with a broken arm needed a cast and some painkillers.
Did you do it?
Asked the Siler doctor, watching Mina work through his 16th hour without rest. Don't you need to sleep? I'll sleep when everyone's treated, Mina said, injecting a painkiller into a young Threll who had lost his parents. We have stims if we really need to stay awake, but mostly, we just push through. The Siler doctor's antennae drooped. If I went 16 hours without sleep, I would collapse. My species requires 9 hours of rest per cycle. Mina smiled tiredly. Different biology, I guess. What she didn't say was that humans had evolved too. Persistence hunt to chase prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. Staying awake for long periods was uncomfortable, but it was something every human could do when necessary. For these aliens, it was literally impossible. Ambassador Deho finally got his meeting with the Council, but it wasn't what he had hoped for. He stood in the chamber and presented Earth's offer to help. Military support, medical aid, supplies, anything the Council needed. Vexer listened politely and then shook his head. We appreciate your offer, Ambassador, but the Council has decided to handle this crisis internally. We have mobilized our defense fleets and are preparing a counteroffensive. With respect, Counselor, your defense fleets are being destroyed, Deho said bluntly. You've lost 60,000 ships in 2 weeks. Your military commanders have no experience with real combat. Let us help. And what experience do humans have with space warfare? Demanded a Krill counselor. You achieved faster than light travel only 5 years ago. We have been traveling the stars for millennia. We have experience with war, Deho replied quietly. Thousands of years of it. We know how to fight, how to survive, how to win against impossible odds. That's what living on a Deathworld teaches you. That is precisely why we cannot accept your help, Vextorn said. If we allow your military forces into Council space, if we show weakness by accepting aid from a species we denied membership to, we will lose credibility. The Council's authority depends on strength and stability. Your authority won't matter if you're all dead, Deho shot back, then immediately regretted his tone. But the words were out now. The chamber fell silent. Finally, Vextharn spoke, his voice cold. This meeting is over, Ambassador. Deho returned to the embassy and immediately sent an encrypted message to Earth Command. The Council wouldn't accept help officially, but that didn't mean humanity had to stand by and watch the slaughter. He just needed permission to act. The response came back within hours. It was short and came directly from Earth's president. Do what's right. We'll handle the politics later. Juan called a meeting with all the human ship captains in the sector. 18 officers crowded into the Horizon's Edge's briefing room. Sunho was there, along with the commanders of every other Earth vessel. The Council has refused our help, Jiwan began. They're too proud to admit they need us. But we didn't come to the stars just to watch innocent people die because of politics. You're talking about engaging the Dominion without authorization, said Captain Bowman Park, commander of the destroyer New Sol. That could be seen as an act of war. Against who? Juan asked. The Dominion is already at war with the Council. We'd just be defending innocent people. The Council might see it as us overstepping, Bowman countered. Let them, Sunho said firmly. I didn't join Earth Defense Force to sit on my hands while people die. If the Council wants to complain, they can do it after we've saved their colonies. The vote was unanimous. The human fleet would position itself near the border between Council space and the contested territories. They would monitor the situation and engage the Dominion if civilians were threatened. It was technically not a violation of orders, though everyone knew they were looking for a fight. They didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, sensors detected a Dominion strike force moving toward a refugee convoy. 60 civilian ships packed with families fleeing the war, protected by only 5 Council escort vessels. The Dominion force consisted of 40 warships. All ships. This is Commander Lee. Sunho's voice came over the fleet channel. We're engaging. Hit them hard and fast. Make them regret waking up this morning. The human ships accelerated at speeds that would have killed most alien crews. 6 Gs of force pushed everyone back into their seats, but humans could handle it. They had evolved on a planet with strong gravity, with bodies built to survive punishment. The Dominion ships were biomechanical nightmares, organic holes with weapons that fired superheated plasma. They were terrifying to look at, and deadly in combat. But they had never fought humans before. Sunho's defiant dawn hit the enemy formation like a hammer, firing missiles and energy weapons in a pattern that alien tacticians would call reckless. He didn't try to preserve his ship, he tried to kill as many enemies as possible before they could reach the refugees. A Dominion destroyer fired on him and he accelerated directly toward it, absorbing hits on his forward shields, and rammed it at the last second, shearing off one of its weapon pods before pulling away. Damage report. He shouted over the alarms. Forward shield at 20%. Hull breaches on decks 3 and 4, but we're still in the fight, sir. Good. Find me another target. Guan fought with cold precision, her ship dancing through the battle like a predator. She noticed patterns in how the Dominion ships moved, how they communicated, and she exploited every weakness. When a plasma bolt hit her port side and tore open her hull, she simply sealed off the damaged sections and kept fighting. Captain! We've lost atmosphere in the entire port quarter, her damage control officer reported. 15 crew killed. Juan's hands tightened on her command chair, but her voice stayed level. Acknowledged. Reroute power from the damaged sections to weapons. Make their deaths count. On the destroyer Busan, Mina Yun and her medical team worked in a converted cargo bay that served as a field hospital. The ship shook with each hit, and she had to brace herself against the operating table to keep working. An engineer with burns across 40% of his body, a gunner with shrapnel wounds. A pilot who had taken a plasma bolt through his shoulder when his cockpit decompressed. We need to evacuate to a safer area, one of the other medics said nervously as another explosion rocked the ship. There is no safer area, Mina replied, not looking up from her patient. We're in the middle of a battle. Do your job. The fight lasted 47 minutes. When it was over, 31 Dominion ships were destroyed or disabled. The human fleet had lost 3 ships and suffered heavy damage to 7 others, but the refugee convoy was safe. The Council escort commander, Varelnian named Court, stared at his tactical display in disbelief. He had been certain they were all going to die. The human ships had fought with a ferocity he had never witnessed, taking damage that would have forced any Council ship to retreat, and kept fighting. One human frigate had continued to fire its weapons even as its hull came apart, only stopping when the power core finally failed. Get me a channel to the human commander, Court said quietly. Sunho's face appeared on the screen, blood running down from a cut on his forehead. Behind him, Sunho's bridge was a mess of sparks and smoke. This is Commander Lee.
Commander Lee.
Thank you. You saved thousands of lives today. That's what we do. Are your ships capable of continuing escort duty? Yes, but you should know that the Council will not be pleased by your intervention. Let them be displeased, Sunho said. We'll be here if you need us again. The news of the battle spread quickly through Sanctuary Prime. The reaction was mixed. Many civilians praised the humans for their bravery, but the council leadership was furious. They called Deho in for another meeting. "Your ships had no authorization to engage the Dominion," Vexthorn said angrily. "You have violated council space and acted without permission." "We saved lives," Deho replied. "Thousands of lives that your ships couldn't protect." "That is not the point. You have made us look weak." "You are weak," Deho said, finally losing his patience. "Your ships are advanced, your weapons are powerful, but you've forgotten how to use them. You've had peace for so long that you don't know how to fight anymore. We do. We've been fighting since we learned to walk upright. And whether you like it or not, you need us." The chamber erupted in angry voices. But as Deho looked around, he saw something else in some of the counselors' eyes. Not anger, fear. Because they knew he was right. The city of Valish Prime burned under alien skies. Once home to 3 million Thrall civilians, it now served as a foothold for Dominion forces that pushed deeper into Council territory every day. The Council's military response had been sluggish and ineffective. Committees debated tactics while planets fell. Officers with no combat experience gave orders that got thousands killed. The Dominion advanced steadily, and nothing seemed able to stop them. On Earth, General Tyjan Beek stood in front of the World Council and made his case. He was 60 years old, gray-haired and scarred from the last war humanity had fought a brief border conflict with Mars colonies that had ended 20 years ago. He had spent his career studying military history, reading about ancient battles and modern tactics, preparing for a war that everyone said would never come. "The Galactic Council is losing," he said simply. "They've lost 15 worlds in 3 months. Their casualty rates are staggering. If we don't act now, the Dominion will control half the galaxy within a year." "The Council rejected our help," one of the Earth representatives pointed out. "They made it very clear they don't want us involved. And we involve ourselves without asking," Tyjan replied. "We deploy our full military force to the contested regions, and we fight. Not for the Council's approval, but because it's the right thing to do. Because if the Dominion wins, they'll come for Earth eventually. And because we're the only ones who can stop them." The debate lasted 3 hours. In the end, the vote was unanimous. Earth would go to war. The deployment was massive by human standards. 200 warships, from small frigates to massive carriers. 500,000 ground troops, fully equipped and trained. Medical ships, supply vessels, and everything needed to sustain a military campaign light years from home. It was the largest military operation humanity had ever attempted. Lieutenant Hannah Song sat in the cockpit of her fighter, watching the launch preparations through her canopy. She was 24, one of the youngest pilots in the fleet, with reflexes fast enough to make her instructors nervous. Around her, 39 other fighters from her squadron performed pre-flight checks. "Blue Squadron, this is Control," came the voice over her come. "You're cleared for launch. Good hunting." Hannah pushed her throttle forward and felt the familiar pressure as her fighter accelerated out of the carrier's launch bay. The stars stretched ahead of her, beautiful and deadly. Somewhere out there, the Dominion waited. The first major engagement came at the Thesaurus system. The Dominion had conquered the planet 6 weeks ago and was using it as a staging ground for further attacks. The Council had tried twice to retake it and failed both times, losing thousands of ships in the process. General Tyjan's plan was different. He didn't send ships to bombard the planet from orbit. He didn't try to win a clean, civilized war in space. He did something the Council considered insane. He landed troops on the surface while the Dominion fleet was still in orbit. During active bombardment, Sergeant Jihonem felt his transport shake as it punched through Zazer's atmosphere with Dominion fire all around it. He was 31, a career Marine who had joined the service right out of school. He had trained for every environment Earth could simulate, but this was different. This was real combat against an enemy that had crushed every force sent against it. 30 seconds to landing, the pilot shouted. "Brace for impact." The transport hit the ground hard, its landing gear absorbing the shock. The rear ramp dropped, and Jiho led his squad out into chaos. Explosions bracketed their position. The sky rained fire from the orbital battle overhead. The air smelled wrong, filled with alien chemicals and burning metal. "Move, move, move," Jiho shouted. "Get to cover and establish a perimeter." His Marines scattered, each one knowing their role, each one trusting the others to do theirs. This was what made human soldiers different. They fought as a unit, each individual willing to risk everything for the person next to them. The Council's armies were collections of individuals. Human armies were packs. The battle for the Sara lasted 72 hours. It was brutal, desperate, and terrifying. The Dominion soldiers were bioengineered warriors, fast and strong, and fearless. But humans had something else. They had the ability to keep fighting when they should have been dead. Jiho took a plasma bolt to his leg on the second day. It burned through his armor and charred the muscle underneath. A council soldier would have been out of the fight, medevaced to a hospital ship. Jiho tied a tourniquet above the wound, injected himself with a combat stim, and kept fighting. "Sarge, you need medical attention," one of his Marines said. Later, Jiho growled, "We've got a position to hold." In space above the Sara, Hannah and her squadron introduced the Dominion to something they had never encountered. Atmospheric dogfighting tactics adapted for space combat. The Council's pilots fought at range, using missiles and energy weapons from safe distances. Hannah flew close, using her fighter's maneuverability and her own reflexes to dance through enemy formations. She came at her targets from angles they didn't expect, pulling G-forces that would have knocked alien pilots unconscious, then rolling away before they could respond. Her squadron followed her lead, fighting with an aggression that terrified both allies and enemies. "Blue Leader, this is Blue 7, came a voice over her come. "I'm hit. Engines at 40%. Can you make it back to the carrier?" Hannah asked, even as she lined up another shot. "Negative. They're on me. I'm coming." Hannah broke off her attack run and accelerated toward her wingman. 2 Dominion fighters were closing in for the kill. She fired her missiles early, too early by Council standards, but she knew what she was doing. The missiles forced the enemy fighters to break formation, and in that moment of confusion, she was on them. Her energy cannons tore through one fighter's hull. The second tried to run, but she pursued it into Thessera's atmosphere, following it down through the turbulence until she had a clear shot. The fighter exploded in a ball of flame. Hannah pulled up hard, feeling the G-force try to crush her into her seat, and climbed back into space. "Blue 7, head home. I'll cover you." On the ground, the human forces pushed forward meter by meter. The Dominion held strong defensive positions, and their weapons were devastatingly effective. But they had never fought an enemy that simply refused to stop. Mina. Yoon worked in a field hospital set up in a bombed-out building. She had been awake for 60 hours straight, treating wounded soldiers as fast as they came in. Her hands shook from exhaustion, but she forced them steady. A Dominion plasma weapon had killed 3 of her medical staff on the first day. Now she was running the hospital with half the people she needed. A Marine was carried in with his chest torn open by shrapnel. Both lungs were collapsed, his heart was barely beating, and he was drowning in his own blood. Any alien species would have died instantly from such wounds. The Marine was still conscious. "Am I going to make it, Doc?" he asked, his voice bubbling. "Yes," Mina said firmly, even though she wasn't sure. She worked with practiced efficiency, sealing the wounds, inflating his lungs, keeping his heart beating through sheer determination. 20 minutes later, he was stable. "How?" one of the alien medics asked, watching in amazement. "He should be dead." "Humans are hard to kill," Mina replied simply. The turning point came on the 3rd day. General Taijin had positioned his forces carefully, absorbing heavy casualties while slowly encircling the main Dominion stronghold. Then, when the enemy was fully committed to their defensive positions, he gave the order for a full assault from all sides at once. It was exactly the kind of aggressive, risky tactic that the Council would never approve. It would cost thousands of lives. But it would work. Jiho's squad was part of the final push. His leg was infected now, the wound festering despite the antibiotics, and every step sent spikes of pain through his body. He ignored it. Around him, his Marines charged forward through enemy fire, each one knowing they might die in the next second. Each one going anyway because their brothers and sisters needed them. The Dominion soldiers fought well, but they were designed for tactical combat, for careful maneuvers and efficient killing. They weren't prepared for humans who kept coming no matter how many fell, who stepped over their dead friends and kept firing, who fought harder when they were wounded, not weaker. The stronghold fell after 6 hours of close-quarters combat. The surviving Dominion forces retreated to their ships and fled the system. The Sara was liberated. The cost was terrible. 20,000 human soldiers dead. Another 30,000 wounded. But the planet was free, its 2 million surviving civilians rescued from Dominion occupation. And for the first time since the war began, Dominion had been decisively defeated. News of the victory spread through Council space like wildfire. Suddenly, the humans were no longer the primitive Deathworlders to be dismissed. They were the only ones who could actually beat the Dominion. Warlord Kruthox received the reports of the Thessera, defeat in his command ship. He was a massive creature, 12 feet tall with a body covered in biomechanical armor and weapons. He had conquered 47 worlds for the Dominion. He had broken entire civilizations. And now these humans had beaten his finest troops. "What are they?" he asked his intelligence officer. "They come from a world classified as a Category 9 death world," the officer replied. "They are physically resilient, psychologically aggressive, and they fight with a ferocity we have never encountered. They do not redder. Eat, they do not surrender. And they seem to fight harder when they are wounded or outnumbered." Kruthox felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Fear. These creatures from their impossible world were Death's children, and they had come to the stars, on Sanctuary Prime. Counselor Vexthorn watched the footage from the Sara with growing horror and grudging respect. He saw human soldiers take wounds that would kill any Council soldier and keep fighting. He saw their medics work miracles that should be impossible. He saw their ships fight with a reckless courage that was either insane or brilliant. "They saved the Sara," another counselor said quietly. "Something we couldn't do," as Vexthorn replied. "Perhaps we were wrong about them. Perhaps we need to reconsider." But even as he said it, he knew it was already too late for pride. The Council needed humanity now. The only question was whether the humans would still help them after all the rejection and insults. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was held 3 days after the Battle of the Sara. Every member species sent their representatives, and for the first time since humanity had arrived at Sanctuary Prime, the human delegation was invited to sit at the main table rather than observe from the gallery. Ambassador Deho walked into the chamber with Guan and Hoyon flanking him. The room fell silent as they took their seats. Counselor Vexthorn stood at the central podium, and for the first time since they had met, Deho saw genuine humility in the alien's golden eyes. "Ambassador Deho," Vexthorn began, "the Council has debated long and hard about recent events. Your forces acted without our authorization, violated our protocols, and engaged in combat operations within our sovereign space." He paused. "And in doing so, you've saved millions of lives that we could not save ourselves. You defeated an enemy that we could not defeat. You achieved victory where we found only failure." The chamber remained silent. Every counselor knew what was coming. "On behalf of the Galactic Council, I formally request Earth's military assistance in the defense of Council space," Vexthorn said. "We were wrong to reject you. We were wrong to judge you by the harshness of your world rather than the content of your character. We ask now for your forgiveness and your help." Deho stood slowly. He had prepared a speech, something diplomatic and gracious. But in that moment, looking at these ancient species who had finally learned humility, he spoke from his heart. "We don't need your apologies," he said quietly. "We need your cooperation. We'll fight for you, not because you asked, but because it's right. But in return, we need command authority for military operations and full membership in this council when the war is over. No more observer status. No more being treated as lesser beings. We fight as equals, or we don't fight at all." The vote was unanimous. Earth was granted emergency military authority, and promised full council membership when the war ended. The council's military headquarters became a strange place over the following weeks. Human officers walked the corridors alongside aliens who had served for decades. At first, there was tension. The alien commanders resented taking orders from these young, aggressive Deathworlders. But results spoke louder than pride. Yerinca was 33 years old when she was appointed as the Joint Operations Commander. She had graduated top of her class at the Academy, served with distinction in the Mars border war, and had a mind that could process tactical information faster than most computers. She was also blunt, aggressive, and had no patience for the Council's bureaucratic approach to warfare. "This battle plan is garbage," she said flatly at her first strategy meeting with Council commanders. "You're spreading your forces too thin, reacting to enemy movements instead of predicting them, and your supply lines are vulnerable to interdiction." A Vrelnian admiral bristled. "That plan was developed by our finest strategic minds over 3 weeks of analysis." "Then your finest strategic minds have never been in a real war," Yaren replied. "The Dominion is pushing toward the Kelter system. That's obvious from their fleet movements. So we don't defend everywhere, we concentrate our forces at Kelter, and we hit them with everything we have when they arrive. We take the initiative instead of waiting to get punched." The Vrelnian admiral looked ready to argue, but Vextarn, who was observing the meeting, raised a hand. "Her analysis is sound. Implement her plan." The Battle of Kelter proved Yaren right. The Dominion fleet arrived expecting light resistance. Instead, they found the combined human council fleet waiting in ambush. The battle was fierce, but the humans had trained the council forces in aggressive tactics. When the Dominion tried to retreat, they found their escape routes blocked. It was a crushing victory, but the Dominion was learning too. If humans could adapt and overcome, so could they. And they had a weapon that the council had never faced. The plague started in the Morrison system. A world of 6 billion Thrells suddenly went dark, all communications ceasing within hours. When scout ships investigated, they found a nightmare. The entire planet's population was dead or dying from a biological weapon designed specifically to target. Council species. Dr. Murray Kong was a xenopsychologist. Not a medical doctor, but she had been studying human-alien differences since Earth first made contact with the Council. When samples of the plague were brought to Sanctuary Prime for analysis, she was called in to consult. "This is engineered," she said, examining the data. "The Dominion analyzed Council biology and created something that attacks the cellular structure of every major species. It's brilliant and horrifying. Can we stop it?" asked the Council's chief medical officer. "I don't know. But I do know that humans will be affected differently than other species. Our immune systems evolved on a death world. We fight off infections that would kill most council members. We might survive this where others can't." She was right, but it was cold comfort. The plague spread to 4 more systems within a week. Billions died. The council species had survival rates between 3 and 8%. Humans had a 60% survival rate. That still meant millions would die if the plague reached Earth or human colonies. Mina Yoon volunteered to work in the plague zones. She had survived the Thesara battle and earned a dozen commendations for her medical work under fire. Now she found herself on a dying world, treating patients while wearing a biosuit, knowing that if the suit failed, she would likely die too. The victims suffered horribly. The plague attacked their nervous systems first, causing pain that would make most humans scream. For the more sensitive alien species, the agony was beyond description. Mina worked through exhaustion and horror, trying to ease their suffering, trying to find some way to help. And then she got sick. A tear in her biosuit, too small to notice. The plague entered her bloodstream. Within hours, she was running a fever. Within a day, she was delirious with pain. The other medical staff wanted to evacuate her, but she refused. "I can still work," she insisted, even as her body temperature spiked to levels that would cook an alien brain. "There are people who need help." She worked for 3 more days while her immune system fought the plague. She lost 20 pounds, her hands shook constantly, and every movement was agony. But she worked. Other human medical staff who caught the plague did the same. They kept treating patients even while dying themselves, because that's what humans did. They endured. Of the 60 human medical personnel who caught the plague, 37 survived. Of those survivors, 35 returned to work within a week, still weak, but unwilling to stay in bed while people suffered. The council medical staff watched in amazement and something approaching awe. Dr. Murray used the data from human survivors to develop a treatment. It wasn't a cure, but it raised survival rates to 40% for most species. Hundreds of millions of lives were saved. When Mina finally recovered enough to return to duty, she found herself decorated as a hero by 3 different alien governments. "I just did my job," she said when presented with the medals. "No," replied a Threll official whose world she had helped save. "You did the impossible. You showed us what it means to never give up." The war's momentum shifted. The plague had been the Dominion's secret weapon, but humanity's resilience blunted its effectiveness, and the human soldiers kept pushing forward, liberating worlds one by one, teaching the Council forces how to fight with courage and determination. Ambassador Taiyang replaced Deho 6 months into the war. Deho had served well, but he was a peacetime diplomat. Taiyang was harder, more pragmatic. Chosen because Earth needed someone who could negotiate from a position of strength. He arrived at Sanctuary Prime with new demands. "We're losing thousands of soldiers every week fighting your war," he told the Council. "We want full trading rights, access to your technology archives, and a permanent seat on the Security Council. Not after the war." "Now, those are significant concessions," Vextharn replied carefully. "And we're making significant sacrifices," Taiyang shot back. "Half the human military is deployed in Council space. Our civilians are dying from the plague just like yours. We're not asking for charity. We're asking for fair payment for services rendered." The negotiations were tough, but ultimately the Council agreed. Humanity had proven itself not just as warriors, but as equals. Earth received a permanent Security Council seat and access to technologies that would advance human civilization by centuries. But more importantly, relationships changed. Human officers and Council personnel who fought together formed bonds of friendship. Shared trauma created understanding. Alien civilians who had been rescued by human soldiers began to see past the physical differences and recognize the courage underneath. Yarensa found herself becoming friends with the Vrelnian admiral who had initially resented her. They shared drinks after successful operations and debated tactics late into the night. She learned about his culture, and he learned about hers. The war was terrible, but it was forging something new, a real alliance, based on mutual respect. Jihonam recovered from his leg wound, though he would walk with a limp for the rest of his life. He returned to duty and found that his squad now included 2 Threll soldiers and a Siler. They had volunteered to serve under him, wanting to learn from human combat tactics. At first, he worried about them. They seemed so fragile, so unsuited for the brutal reality of warfare, but they surprised him. They couldn't endure pain like humans couldn't go without sleep or push through injuries, but they learned to fight with cunning and courage. They learned to trust each other and work as a unit. They became real soldiers. "You know," Jiho said to one of his Threll soldiers after a successful mission, "when I first met your people, I thought you were too gentle for war. I was wrong. Courage isn't about how much pain you can take. It's about being afraid and fighting anyway. Die." The Threll soldier's translator couldn't quite capture the emotion in his reply, but Jiho understood it anyway. They were brothers now, forged in fire. The Dominion was retreating on all fronts, but they weren't defeated yet. Warlord Krothux had one last card to play. If he couldn't win the war through conventional means, he would make one desperate strike at the Council's heart. He would attack Sanctuary Prime itself with every ship he had left. It would be the largest battle in galactic history, and everyone knew that whoever won would control the future of the UCE. The warning came from long-range scanners stationed at the edge of Council space. 3,000 Dominion ships, everything. Warlord Krothux had left, moving in a direct line towards Sanctuary Prime. There was no deception, no attempt at stealth. It was a final, desperate gamble: destroy the Council's seat of power or die trying. "General," Taijin stood in the war room aboard the command carrier Inchin, studying the tactical displays with his senior officers. The numbers were bad. The combined Human Council fleet had 1,800 ships available to defend Sanctuary Prime. They would be outnumbered nearly 2-1. "We can't win a straight fight," said Admiral Court, who now served as Taijin's second-in-command. "Even with human tactics, the numbers are against us." "Then we don't fight straight," Taijin replied. He pulled up a schematic of Krothek's S flagship, a massive biomechanical monstrosity 3 times the size of any council ship. The Dominion uses a centralized command structure. Kill Krotheks, and their entire fleet will fall apart. Their hive mind take out the head and the body dies. "You're talking about a boarding action during a major fleet engagement," Yaren said slowly. "That's suicide." "Yes," Taijin agreed. "Which is why only humans will do it. We're the only ones crazy enough to try and stubborn enough to succeed." Captain Ji-won Kim listened to the plan with a growing sense of inevitability. She had known from the moment the war started that it might come to this, a desperate gamble where success meant saving billions of lives and failure meant death for everyone she cared about. "I'll lead the boarding party," she said quietly. "My Taijin began. "I'm the best qualified," she interrupted. "I've commanded the Horizon's Edge through 15 major engagements. I know Dominion ship layouts better than anyone except our intelligence officers. And I'm not asking permission, General. I'm volunteering." Taijin looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Pick your team. We'll have 200 Marines and the best boarding craft we have. May whatever god you believe in watch over you." Sergeant Jihonam was one of the first people Juwon asked for. He had recovered from his leg injury enough to pass the physical requirements, though he still limped. When she told him the plan, he didn't hesitate. "I'm in," he said simply. "Hey, when do we leave?" "Tomorrow." "We'll have one chance to get this right." Lieutenant Hannah Song and her squadron received their orders personally from Jiwon. They would escort the boarding craft through the thickest part of the battle, clearing a path to Krothek's S flagship while the rest of the fleet kept the Dominion forces occupied. "I won't lie to you," Jiwon told them. "Most of you won't survive this. Enemy will throw everything at us to stop the boarding action. But if we succeed, we save the entire galaxy." Hana looked at her fellow pilots. Some were scared. She could see it in their eyes. But none of them backed down. "We didn't come to the stars to play it safe," Hannah said. "We came to explore, to fight, to matter. This is our moment. Let's make it count." The battle began at dawn, by station time. The Dominion fleet dropped out of FTL in a massive formation, their biomechanical ships glowing with internal power, weapons already charging. The Human Council fleet moved to intercept, spreading out in a defensive formation designed by Yaren's, aggressive enough to hold the enemy's attention, but flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances. The first exchange of fire lit up the void. With energy weapons and missiles, ships on both sides began dying immediately, torn apart by weapons powerful enough to crack planets. The scale of destruction was beyond anything humanity had ever witnessed, beyond anything the Council had seen in 10,000 years. On the bridge of the Inchin, General Taijin watched the battle unfold with cold calculation. "All ships, engage at will. Make them think we're trying to fight them off conventionally. Don't let them see the real attack coming." Guwon's boarding craft launched from the Defiant Dawn's hangar bay, along with 5 other craft, each carrying 40 Marines. They were small, fast, and shielded just enough to survive a few hits. Around them, Hannah's squadron formed up in a protective formation. "Blue Squadron, this is Blue Leader," Hannah said over the comm. "Stay tight and watch each other's backs. We're going to fly through hell, so I need everyone sharp." They accelerated toward the enemy formation. Immediately, Dominion fighters began breaking off to intercept them. Hannah saw them coming and smiled grimly. "All fighters, engage. Show them what Earth pilots can do." The dogfight was chaos. Dominion fighters were fast and deadly, but human pilots had reflexes honed by evolution and training that pushed the limits of what biological beings could achieve. Hannah pulled maneuvers that would have knocked alien pilots unconscious, rolling and diving through enemy fire, never staying in one place long enough to become an easy target. "Blue 3, you've got 2 on your tail," she called out. "I see them. A little help would be nice." Hannah flipped her fighter in a move that defied physics, or at least defied what most species considered survivable physics. Came at the pursuing enemies from an angle they didn't expect. Her cannons tore through one fighter's hull. The second tried to evade, but flew right into Blue 5's firing line. But the enemy numbers were overwhelming.
Ow.
One by one, her pilots started dying. Blue 8, his fighter crippled by a direct hit, deliberately rammed an enemy ship to clear the path. Blue 12's cockpit depressurized, and he kept flying for another 30 seconds before passing out from lack of oxygen. His last act firing missiles that destroyed 2 more enemies. Blue Leader, this is boarding craft 1. Guan's voice came over the comm. We're approaching the flagship. Let's fall back and support the main fleet. Negative, Hannah replied, dodging another volley of fire. We stay with you until you're inside. Hannah, that's an order. Then court-martial me later, Captain. We're seeing this through. The boarding craft raced toward Krothuk's flagship with the surviving fighters clearing the way. Enemy fire concentrated on them now, the Dominion forces realizing too late what was happening. One boarding craft exploded, then another. But 3 made it through, latching onto the flagship's hull and burning through with plasma cutters. Guan was first through the breach. She dropped into a corridor filled with Dominion soldiers and opened fire immediately. Her rifle barked in her hands, each shot precise and controlled. Behind her, Jiho and the Marines poured through, establishing a beachhead. Move forward, Juan shouted. We need to reach the command deck before they lock it down. The fighting inside the flagship was brutal. The corridors were narrow, forcing close-quarters combat where the Dominion's size and strength should have given them an advantage. But humans had evolved as pack hunters, as fighters who coordinated instinctively, and they turned the tight spaces into a killing ground. Geo took a plasma bolt to his shoulder and kept fighting with one arm. Irene named Duri lost half her face to shrapnel and still provided covering fire for her squad. A corporal named Quan used himself as a human shield to protect a wounded comrade, taking 3 hits that should have killed him instantly, but somehow, staying on his feet long enough for the medic to reach them, they fought through deck after deck, leaving bodies behind, human, alien, both. The Dominion threw everything at them, but the humans just kept coming. It's unstoppable and relentless. Outside, the main battle raged. The Council fleet fought with tactics they had learned from humans, refusing to retreat even when the odds turned against them. Ships continued firing until their power cores failed. Crews kept fighting with hull breaches and systems failures that would have forced any reasonable commander to surrender. Yaren TSA coordinated the defense from the Inshan's bridge, her tactical mind processing information faster than the computers. She saw patterns in the enemy movements and exploited them ruthlessly. When a Dominion battle group tried to flank the Council's left wing, she was already repositioning ships to intercept. When another group moved to protect Krothok's flagship, she ordered a feint that drew them out of position, but the casualties were staggering. Hundreds of ships on both sides were destroyed. Thousands died with each passing minute. And still the battle raged. On Krothok's flagship, Juan and her remaining Marines, less than 60, now finally reached the command deck. The doors were sealed and reinforced, designed to withstand orbital bombardment. Jiho planted shaped charges while the Marines held off counterattacking Dominion forces. He shouted, "Make it 20." Guan replied, firing her rifle until it overheated. The charges blew the doors off their hinges. Guan led the rush inside and came face to face with Warlord Krothok. He was enormous. 12 feet of biomechanical nightmare with weapons growing from his body. His soldiers filled the command deck, outnumbering the surviving humans 5-1. "You cannot win," Krothok said, his translator making his voice sound like grinding metal. "I will kill you all." "Maybe," Jiwan replied, raising her rifle, "but we'll kill you first, and that's all that matters." The fight was savage. The Marines charged forward with a battle cry that echoed through the ship. Krothok was incredibly strong, his weapons devastating. He killed 6 Marines in the first 10 seconds. But humans don't fight alone. They fight as a pack, And when one falls, the others fight harder. Jeho hit Kruthux from the side with a plasma grenade that burned through his armor. Another Marine, a woman named Suji, emptied her entire magazine into his legs. Crippling his mobility, G1 closed the distance. Dodging his attacks with reflexes pushed beyond human limits by adrenaline and desperation. She planted charges on his chest armor, the same kind Jeho had used on the doors. Close enough that the explosion would kill her too.
Ow.
She shouted, "Gaho, get them out of here." "Captain, no." Jeho grabbed for her, but she pushed him away. "That's an order, Sergeant. Go. Now." She activated the charges as Jeho and the surviving Marines retreated. The last thing she saw was Kruthux lunging at her, understanding too late what she had done. The explosion tore through the command deck and rippled out through the flagship systems. With Kruthux dead, the Dominion's hive mind fractured. Ships began breaking formation, their crews confused and panicking without central direction. The Human Council fleet pressed the advantage, and what had been a desperate defensive battle became a rout. 3 hours later, the Dominion fleet was destroyed or retreating in chaos. Sanctuary Prime was saved. The war was effectively over, but the cost was terrible. 20,000 ships destroyed on both sides. Millions of casualties. And Captain Ji-won Kim, hero of the Sara and savior of the galaxy, was gone. 5 years passed. The galaxy healed slowly from the wounds of war. The Dominion territories were absorbed peacefully into the Council, their surviving populations freed from Krothux's tyranny. New alliances formed, old prejudices faded. The Council entered a new era. In Sanctuary Prime's Hall of Heroes, 3 statues stood prominently. Captain Ji-won Kim shone standing tall with her rifle in hand. Lieutenant Hannah Song, who had survived the battle and now trained the next generation of pilots. And Sergeant Ji-ho Nam. He walked with a limp, but still served with honor in Earth's Defense Force. Ambassador Taeyong stood before the statues, reflecting on how much had changed. Humanity was now a full member of the Council, respected and valued. Human military academies trained officers from 30 species. Human medical techniques saved lives across the galaxy. Human culture, art, and philosophy enriched the civilizations that had once dismissed Earth as a primitive death world. "We were wrong about your kind," Counselor Vex Tharn said, standing beside him. The old alien had become a close friend over the years. "We saw your strength and called it savage. We saw your endurance and called it recklessness. We didn't understand that these traits came from love for each other. Love for what you believe in. Love strong enough to die for." "You learned," Taeyong replied. "That's what matters." The whole galaxy learned. Yes. And now when we find new species from harsh worlds, worlds we would have called death worlds, we welcome them. We recognize that strength forged in adversity is strength worth having. That is Ji-won's legacy and humanity's gift to us all. Below the statue of Ji-won, new words had been added to the memorial. The Council's new motto, chosen by a unanimous vote: "We are not stronger because we don't feel pain. We are stronger because we endure it." And across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds where different species lived and worked together, humans continued to do what they did best. They endured. They helped. They fought for those who couldn't fight for themselves. They made friends of aliens and brought hope to the hopeless. Because that's what Deathworlders do. They survive. And in surviving, they teach everyone else how to truly live.